Hello, Rocky Mountain students, and welcome to this Monday update. I'm excited to review last week's information and recap the information and prompts that we all shared, and then dive into some things to keep you focused for week 3. I'm just looking at my notes over here. So, before we get into the content of each week, I do just want to reiterate a couple things that were shared and discussed among your peers in our first office hours last Wednesday, which will be happening again this Wednesday. But a lot of people popped on and asked some questions about the screencast assignment for their groups. As you all have been divided into groups among your peers and assigned 2 different leadership theories, it's never too early to dive into those and see if you come across any issues. Finding literature, you do have to have 2 sources outside of the text or the articles that have been provided in that week. So just make sure that you're not stuck or find that the exact name of a leadership theory that I've given isn't translating into your search. Because sometimes researchers, even the literature itself, might coin it one term, but it appears differently in the literature another term. So make sure that you're able to find those. I had a lot of questions about the medium in which these should be presented. People in the past have used the actual screencast website, which is perfectly fine. Some feel more comfortable with that technology, whereas others have used one called Snagit, and I believe you have access to that through Rocky Mountain if they have a subscription. But if not, I can always reach out to Jan Reese with our learning management system, who is very savvy with those kind of recordings. Then your traditional PowerPoint where you can embed voiceover on a slide. My apologies, my phone is not on silent. I know students have done that in the past in other classes where it's easier to divide it up and take your portion of content, record yourself, and then share that file among your peers. You could potentially run into issues with the size of the file being shared across email. The cloud is great, Dropboxes are great. Anywhere you can fit a larger volume, like 5 minutes or more somewhere, might have to look into those options sooner rather than later so you're not running into those glitches come the due date. So be thinking of that. But it doesn't matter to me which way you decide to share that, as long as the assignment details and requirements are met. I do not have to physically see you in the video either. You can do that if you want to, or if that's just how you want to set things up so people can feel that connection with you, that's fine as well. I'm trying to think of the other theme questions. It was mostly about how to go about recording it, and then some people were running into snags of the names of theories and finding the same exact thing in text. But if anything else should come up, please let me know. Please let me know. My thoughts from week 2, again, it was a bit more of a dive into the leadership theory itself with the readings that you had, looking at the spectrum of leadership styles between transformational and transactional, the 2 most commonly cited leadership theories that are really out there. I mean, there's a broad spectrum of everything in between, but when we think about leadership and we think about leaders versus managers, and that's kind of the paradigm or the dichotomy that you're looking at between those 2. And not to say one is more important than the other. Many of you reflected on the fact that it's important to have managers, and I completely agree. It's just finding the right context to use different skills, leader versus manager, and then also if you're too heavy in one or the other, what that can do to your environment or your followers or your people, or the kind of culture that creates for the people you're working with or in charge of or a boss of. So I did really enjoy reading your reflections on the leadership experience or exposure you had, which is tailing off of week 1, where you did have to report if you have any formal exposure, some of you brought a really interesting perspective to the conversation. Like perhaps the formality of sitting in a class and learning about leadership has not been existent in your educational prep, but in other ways, leadership was brought into your career prep. And it's important that you can recognize those moments so that you don't feel as though you've been left out of the conversation, or so that you don't think speech has done any kind of has an injustice, or they're behind the times. I shared with a couple folks in the office hours last week that just in the 3 years that I've been exposed to speech in teaching this class and doing my own research to figure out the leadership opportunities that exist, I think that speech has capitalized on realizing this gap and has provided a ton of opportunities for them, or for all of you. The hard part is when you have that much growth in a short period of time, that can not seem as meaningful or not be as well executed as it was intended to. Growth is a huge factor in leadership. And we'll talk a lot more about that when we get into the weeks where we're talking about change and change management. Some of you might have already decided to go ahead and do your interview, or thinking about who you want to interview. And that term is appears a lot during that week and during the change management week. So growth has a lot to do with that. What were the other? Oh, the general thoughts on issues in healthcare. And I'm smiling because it's just, even though I'm teaching a class full of speech language pathologists, this is not a siloed issue when it comes to the manner of high volume, lots of patients, making ethical decisions. But I can't wrap my mind around who should be in charge of, like, where is that leadership coming from? Like for me, for example, we pay a lot of money to lobbyists who are supposed to defend like these really important topics in athletic training, and are supposed to be helping us pioneer these different avenues to get us at the table to have these conversations with legislators and make a difference and make a change. But maybe laughing is not appropriate, but I laugh because it's like, I don't know where my dues went to pay for that lobbyist, or where this money is generating from, when we're constantly just shut down or still forgotten about. Or, it makes me want to just like go to Capitol Hill myself and stomp around with a sign, but that's not going to get anything accomplished either. But it is important to think like, okay, so if you recognize leadership needs to happen to make these things change, then what part are you playing in that? A term that I like to use is called step up leadership. What are you doing to step up and not only recognize it, but do something about it? And I think some people tend to shy away from the taboo topics, or just, the topics that aren't that popular or could be controversial because of the obvious. What I've started to notice, and I mean, this isn't necessarily supported by the literature, but anecdotally and professionally, what I've noticed is that in those more less than desirable situations, we go into it with this idea that it's going to be terrible and everyone's just going to be on the defense and it's just going to be negative and people are going to look at me differently. But the last couple conversations I've had like that have been very productive, very informative, and both parties have walked away thinking a little bit differently. It does take tact, and it does take it does take knowing the person you're speaking to, so being very aware of their style of communication and their personality. But at the same time, you can't expect a whole lot to change by doing the same thing over and over again. That's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So I challenge you not to maybe think you're going to change the world overnight, but I challenge each of you to just think of a way that you can do something different than what you've ever done before to help tackle those really tough leadership issues in healthcare. So that's my thoughts on that. The last note I have here, I'm really excited about week 3, and I hope you all are too, because you're really diving into your preferred leadership style. Some of you have maybe taken a survey before or have already gone ahead and worked on this week. I see there are already posts there. but have completed the survey and think, that makes sense. That's why I am the way I am, or that's what makes me tick. Or maybe some of you are like, I disagree with that. I've had both happen for my students, and I've even taken these different self-assessments, and I'm like, I don't think that's right. But sometimes you just have to take it for what it is. The Leadership IQ one, there's a lot of different leadership surveys out there. This is just a free one because most of them are not free. People like to make money off of their ideas. So the Leadership IQ, but it is, I would say, fairly accurate. I don't know how valid and trustworthy it is, but the different styles of leadership that are reported elsewhere in literature and supported in the research. But I think you'll all hopefully be able to be a bit more reflective and realize that's why I choose to communicate this way, or that's why I organize things this way, or that's why I think more pragmatically, or that's why whatever it may be. This is a really good week for reflection, but being really honest in your responses to each question or prompt that you're asked during the survey. And then it'll give you a summary of your results in an email, and then there's a video posted that you should watch because it does explain each style of leadership and what that means for you depending on your score and assessment. Your book does a phenomenal job this week. The text you're supposed to read, chapter 2, I believe, about breaking down what an effective leader is. They talk about speech specifically because every healthcare, you could look at it from a couple different ways. You could look at it from healthcare traits, healthcare professional traits. You could look at it from speech traits. You could look at it from nursing traits, physical therapy, athletic training. You could look at all these little subcategories. They're all going to have some overlap, but they are going to have some differences. So I think it's great that your book provides you firsthand insight on speech research and what's been reported as effective traits of a leader in speech. And then they do go into some really great interviews and mention some other survey data from the Harvard Business Review. What I will say though is I hope that you can appreciate that no one style of leadership is perfect. No one person can truly exhibit every single trait all the time for an ideal leader. There was some research done recently in athletic training, and it listed these 46 attributes of the perfect leader. And for me to be 46 different traits in one conversation, that's exhausting. It's just not realistic, but it's just to give you an idea of which ones to exhibit and when to exhibit them. Another thing we talk about a lot in leadership is contextual intelligence or contextual awareness, being able to analyze your context, being able to consider all the different contextual variables that are affecting a situation or your environment or the people you're working with, and then being able to say okay, these traits in this situation are more preferred for this. But that's really, really hard to do when we're kind of in a sense of urgency place or a fight or fight place, when we have really sensitive things going on in a situation, or the people or our patients. It's really hard for us to use the higher brain and be able to take that all in, spin it around a little bit to realize, okay, what should I be doing in this situation, and then spit it back out. You want to react, but that's not the most desirable leadership trait. We are still timely, but at the same time, maybe we should focus on taking a step back to realize, in this situation, what is the best thing I can do, and how can I not let my emotions or my passion or my bias get in the way of my feelings? What is really best for this situation and the people in order to have the best outcome? So this week, like I said, you're going to be taking a look at examining yourself a little bit, your preferred leadership style. Maybe that will help you put together a little bit of that makes sense. That's why I am that way, or whatever it may be. If any of you really disagree with your results, let me know, and maybe we could find another assessment. Like I said, I don't know how valid and reliable the leadership IQ is, because I've done it myself so that I could give it to this class, but I've not done it elsewhere. I have access to other leadership surveys. They're like a package. I had to pay for them to be able to administer them. So yeah, I think that's all my thoughts for this week. This week is a peer-to-peer. This is our first true peer-to-peer posting week. So when you're answering the prompts provided, it's expected that we have a lot of peer interaction. I used to have a requirement that you responded to at least 2 peers, and a lot of the students in prior classes would say, it makes it feel like busy work, or it makes it feel, as an adult learner, I feel like I should have control over how many people I respond to. Fair enough. At the same time, Anna and I will just be kind of watching the conversations unfold. We'll definitely insert from time to time, if something strikes us as interesting, but we will make sure that each of you are responding appropriately and proportionately, and it's thoughtful and meaningful engagement with your peers. I look forward to reading this week's prompts, and I will see you on Wednesday for anyone that stops into the office hours.